Our next speaker is Dr. Susmita Dash from IISc Bangalore. Dr. Susmita Dash is an associate professor in mechanical engineering at the Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore, and leads the Multi-Scale Transport and Energy Research Laboratory (MTERL). Her research focuses on phase change phenomena, bio-inspired superhydrophobic surfaces, desalination, and boiling heat. Dr. Dash earned her PhD from Purdue University in 2014 and has received prestigious awards such as the Winsland Desertion Fellowship and ASME EPPD Student Member of the Year Award. She is a respected reviewer of the top journals in energy, water systems, and surface engineering. Today, she will speak on droplet dynamics on heated surfaces in different boiling regimes, nucleate transition, and film. Let's invite Dr. Sushmita Dash to begin.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sushmita, and today I'll be talking about droplet dynamics on heated surfaces. I thank Professor Arvind for this invitation so I can talk here. I'll just talk for 30 seconds on what my lab works on. So we are the Multi-Scale Transport and Energy Research Lab. We work at an intersection of heat transfer, fluid mechanics, surface wettability, mastering, and so on, mainly to solve problems related to energy, water, and food safety. In energy, we work on areas such as thermal storage, thermochemical energy storage, thermal management, looking at various fundamental aspects of evaporation, boiling, condensation, and so on. And we also work on integration to make devices. Few of the projects that we are looking at is development of microcluster for nanosatellite, for passive thermal transport devices such as thermosiphon, microloop heat pipes, silicon-based microloop heat pipes, and so on. In water, we look at different areas such as desalination. We work a lot on solar thermal, interfacial solar thermal desalination, ice mitigation, looking at crystallization when you have salt solution present, how does it affect phase change, and so on. And we are also looking at utilizing some of this fundamental aspect to solve practical problems such as detection of adulteration in various foods such as milk. We're looking at detection of plant health using evapotranspiration, looking at agricultural sprays. But if you look at all these problems, you'll see that they are all mostly interfacial problems. You take any issue, you can mostly solve it by looking at how things behave at an interface. It could be solid liquid, liquid vapor, solid liquid vapor, contact lens, and so on. So on, all these problems deal with them. In today's talk, I'll be mostly talking about the way a droplet interacts with a heated surface with application to thermal management. So this slide needs no explanation, but we know that thermal management is important. One of the ways to look at why this droplet interaction with surface is important is mainly for spray cooling application, for particle drying, and so on. And typical temperature ranges from like 200 degrees Celsius to 400 degrees Celsius, where we have to go for two-phase cooling because they have a very high heat transfer coefficient. And all these applications, the way the droplet interacts with the surface is very important. Right? So, and this droplet interaction with the surface depends upon the wall superheat, depends upon the surface morphology, liquid properties, and so on. This is a curve. We have already looked at this curve for the boiling heat transfer, boiling heat curve. So it gives the variation of heat flux with the wall superheat. So you can see that as we increase the surface temperature, you have the single phase cooling, and then we have the nucleate boiling case where the heat transfer coefficient is very large, followed by the maximum critical heat flux, which is the maximum amount of heat that can be rejected from a surface. That is the CHM, critical heat flux. If we increase the heat flux beyond the critical heat flux, what happens is that the liquid contact with the surface is reduces, right? So then what happens is that there's intermittent contact between the liquid and the heated surface, and therefore the heat transfer coefficient deteriorates rapidly. As you increase the heat flux further, or you can also think of it, so it can be either way. Either you are controlling the heat flux or you're controlling the surface temperature. Right? So as we increase the heat flux or we increase the surface temperature, what happens is that the entire contact, the droplet with the surface is completely eliminated because of the formation of a vapor film. Right? And that is called as the Leidenfrost temperature, which marks the temperature at which the initiation of film boiling occurs. Right? And you can imagine that this is the regime which we completely want to avoid if you are looking at applications for cooling applications, right? There's just a video for nuclear boiling. Okay, so this is a video for nuclear boiling where you have vigorous contact, vigorous boiling, and then we have this film boiling where the so in this case you have the film boiling, or it marks like the around the Leidenfrost temperature. Although the temperature is higher in this case compared to this case, but still the contact of the liquid with the surface is completely eliminated. Right? So this Leidenfrost temperature is very detrimental for heat transfer application, and we want to elevate the temperature corresponding to this Leidenfrost effect. For that, some of our work in our lab, what we showed is that if you have this surface morphology, so these are silicon microtextures, what we showed was that we can increase the Leidenfrost temperature compared to a smooth surface by having these microtextures. Right? In this case, the microtextures have a size of like 10 micrometers, and the width and the gap is varied, and the height of the microtexture is varied. So this green point that you see here is the Leidenfrost temperature corresponding to a smooth surface. And we can see that for higher heights, the Leidenfrost temperature can be almost 2 times what you see on a smooth surface, right? And that we explain in terms of what happens in terms of the heat transfer to the droplet and in terms of the flow of vapor beneath the droplet, right? So imagine a droplet which is sitting on a heated surface. What makes it sit on the surface, right? What avoids the contact? The idea here is you have a droplet sitting on a heated surface. So what happens? The heat that is conducted from the surface to the droplet, the heat transfer happens through a composite interface of these pillars, in this case a textured surface, and vapor gap, right? So that gives us an effective resistance to heat transfer, and whatever heat transfer happens across this composite interface is used to vaporize this liquid which is there on the top, right? And the vapor goes through the pillars, and now it's almost like it provides a lubrication force which pushes the droplet upward. It doesn't let the drop contact the surface, right? So now there is a balance between the weight of the drop in this case and the vapor layer pressure force, which helps in levitating the droplet. That's the entire idea. What happens in the presence of textures, right? In the presence of textures, of course, there's an influence on the effective thermal resistance, but the textures also influence the way the vapor goes through the textures, right? So now an important parameter that comes into picture is the substrate permeability, which gives us an idea of the ease of the vapor flow through the textures, right? If I have very tightly packed textures, that means it's difficult for the vapor to flow through the pillars, right? The permeability is low, the resistance to flow is low, right? So the lubrication pressure that I would get increases. So what we showed through this work is that when you have very sparse pillars, right? So it's not like if I have densely packed pillars, I will have a very high Leidenfrost temperature. That was not correct. So what we showed was that when you have like sparse pillars, the permeability of the pillars go up. That means easy for the vapor to flow through it. And we showed that the increase in effective permeability resulted in a reduction in the vapor gap. So vapor gap means, what is the excess vapor gap? What is this G over here? Gap above the top of the pillars. So that's what we showed, and we used high magnification imaging to show the vapor gap that is there. So that is one thing that we showed, the influence of textures on the Leidenfrost temperature. Some of the work we also did was to show that, let's say I have a confined Leidenfrost droplet. So this is the cross-sectional view of a Leidenfrost droplet that we are seeing on these textured pillars. So what you can see, so these are at the same frame rate. You can see that this is on a texture which has a height of 5 micrometer and a pillar spacing of 20 micrometers. What you can see from here is that as I make the pillars more and more sparse, the internal convection within the droplet also reduces. And again, that has to do with the excess vapor gap that was established between the surface and the droplet, right? So you can see, so this is basically a single roll convection that you see inside the droplet. So here you have a millimetric droplet where we have a laser light sheet shining the central plane of the drop, and we are doing we are doing the visualization of the central plane of the drop, and you can see that the convection is in the form of a single roll motion, as opposed to an axisymmetric toroidal vortex motion that you see in the case of a droplet on a heated surface. Right? Such type of motion has also been reported in the literature. So you see, this is a Leidenfrost drop. One application of Leidenfrost effect or droplet interaction on the surface is in the case of spray cooling, where you do not want the Leidenfrost effect to happen. Others is in the case of particle drying, in case of pharmaceuticals and so on, where you do not want a, so Leidenfrost effect gives us a contactless platform. I can do whatever within the droplet and the droplet is not contacting the surface. I can completely eliminate the contact line pinning effects. So in these cases, if you look at this video over here, so this was the work by Professor David Keres from the David Keres group, where they showed was that in the case of a Leidenfrost drop, there's a single roll movement, and the single roll movement helps in a directional propulsion of the droplet on the surface, right? So again, why this is important? This is very important because these Leidenfrost droplets are now being explored for application in microreactors, in formation of supraparticles and so on. So what happens inside the droplet is of importance to us, right? So these are a few applications. So this is for this. So right now, very long drop towers are used for drying application. So can we use a Leidenfrost droplet itself as a platform to dry droplets? And that work, they showed that there's some, I think this is work by Professor Mahadevan. So they showed that there's a buckling of particles inside the drop on a Leidenfrost drop. So of course the convection plays a role, right? This convection is also associated, convection inside the drop and the and this Leidenfrost droplet is also associated with something called as this droplet bouncing and droplet trampolining. You must have seen the trampoline. You have maybe like used trampoline. With every bounce on the trampoline, the height to which you bounce up increases. That's the exact same dynamics that the droplet has been shown to exhibit, right? So the previous theories that are there, they're very recent observation. In this work by Professor Pulikato's group, what they showed was that when you have a droplet sitting on a surface, at the droplet air or vapor interface, there are these ripples that are formed because now you have a vapor which is flowing out. When the vapor which is flowing out, they suggested that it's also associated with some ripples at the surface because of the Kelvin-Helmholtz instability, and that leads to this trampolining behavior of the droplet. I have to move actually back and forth because the backward is not capturing this. So you can see there's also associated with some trampolining events. There's another work which showed that this internal convection with the droplet. So this droplet tramp. So here you see every time the droplet bounces on the surface, it's actually bouncing up higher and higher and higher. So in this work, they showed that the internal convection within the droplet is what is leading to the droplet trampolining. So every time, but in this case, you can see that it's in the form of an axisymmetric toroidal vortex pattern. So they suggested that this upward motion of the internal convection at the center is what is able to overcome the gravity, and that leads to the trampolining of a droplet. So we showed that, droplet trampolines. These are our experiments on a slightly concave surface. So the droplet stays in place. You can see these are the low speed images. You can see that the droplet trampolines, and then the droplet comes to a complete rest because there's dissipation associated with this bouncing. Droplet comes to a complete rest, and then something happens and the droplet starts trampolining again. So our objective was to search an answer for why it happens. Why does the droplet, here you see that again it starts bouncing and starts trampolining again. And this is self-excited motion without any external perturbation. And that is what we are trying to see. And we saw that this observation that I showed is universal for all the different fluids that we tested, for different droplet sizes we tested and so on. Does not agree with the theory that the previous theory that trampolining stops at certain bond number. We showed that even till a very small size, till we can see the droplet trampolines and so on. Right? And then when we try to do because in this case, the PIV is difficult because an unconstrained droplet can move, but the bulk illumination showed that this trampolining effect is not dependent upon the internal convection. And this is the case of water droplet. There we have a glycerol droplet, like some water glycerol mixture. In both the cases, the droplet trampolines. Here we have internal convection, there we have very minimum internal convection. That means the internal convection is not what is leading to the trampolining. So what is it? So this is what I mean by trampoline, right? So here we are tracking the position of the droplet. You can see that there are time instances where the height to which the droplet bounces up actually increases, and we saw that there are discrete sizes of the droplet. There are very definite sizes of the droplet at which we see the trampolining effect. And this happens for water, this happens for ethanol, acetone, and so on. You can see that the droplet bouncing height reduces, again increases, and so on. Right? The other thing that we see is that I said that the droplet comes to a complete rest. When the droplet comes to a complete rest, you can see what happens before that, what happens after that. Before that, you can see that the droplet bouncing height reduces, the drop comes to a complete rest, and something happens and it starts trampolining that is marked by the increase in the bouncing height with each consecutive jump. If you do an FFT, because it's like a time series data, if you do an FFT of this, Fourier transform of this, we saw that there's a dominant frequency of this bouncing. And we saw that that dominant frequency is half of the Rayleigh frequency. Rayleigh frequency we can calculate that for a given size, we can calculate the Rayleigh frequency. And we see that this frequency that at which we see the dominant frequency is almost half of this frequency that we see, which tells us that this entire dynamics of this droplet is somehow related to the Rayleigh frequency of the drop itself and the bouncing of the drop itself. So now let's look at just a Leidenfrost drop, again revisiting that. You see, this is what I told, that the droplet is balanced, the weight of the droplet is balanced by the lubrication pressure force beneath the drop, right? So now, so if I take the linear momentum conservation over here, I can write the motion of the drop in this form, where FL is the lubrication force minus mg, which is the weight of the drop, and that governs the motion of the drop, right? This lubrication force we can calculate by solving the Navier-Stokes equation for the vapor flow in this vapor gap, right? Using lubrication approximation. If we do that, we can calculate what is FL, which is the lubrication force. Now I can rewrite this equation in this format, which is similar to a non-linear spring mass damper system. This entire equation, where h is the height of the droplet itself. Here, this is the damping term, which is coming from the viscosity of the vapor beneath the drop, and we have the vapor recoil force, and we have the lubrication force, right? If I look at this equation under equilibrium, if I ignore this time variant term, we can calculate what is the equilibrium vapor height, and that is what I showed in the first part of the talk. This is the equilibrium vapor height that you can see, and that is dependent upon the wall superheat, dependent on the size of the drop, and so on. This also gives us the natural frequency of the vapor layer oscillation, so I can calculate using this. Now what we do is that we non-dimensionalize this equation, right? In terms of, we non-dimensionalize h with respect to h naught, and with non-dimensional time with respect to the vapor layer frequency, time scale associated with that. Right? If we do that, we get this equation over here. If you look at it, Fv is the vapor recoil force and Fl is the lubrication force. Right? Fv is related to the square of the contact radius, and Fl is related to the fourth power of the contact radius, and so on. Right? Now, if you think about it, in the previous equation that I showed, there was Rc, which is the contact radius. But the droplet, and I told that there is something related to the natural frequency of the droplet. The droplet contact radius is not fixed because of the motion of the droplet itself, right? So every time the droplet is trying to sit on the surface, the radius of the contact radius is not fixed, but you can actually write the contact radius as Rc bar, which is the average contact radius, plus some time varying component, and that is again coming from the Rayleigh frequency over there. So that is how you can write the contact radius. And that's what we substitute here, and then we linearize, then we can write this H in terms of some small perturbation. If we do the linear stability analysis, we can get this equation over here, right? And this tells us that why the droplet trampolines, because this is in the form of the Matthews equation, and we can see that this equation is now like unstable for very small perturbations, where we can write when n is equal to 4 divided by this square, right? And this is exactly what we see in our experiment. So n has integer and half integer values, and n is given by the ratio of the vapor layer frequency and the Rayleigh frequency. Whenever this ratio of the vapor layer frequency and the Rayleigh frequency is integer or half integer square, that is when we see the trampoline. And that is what was explaining the discrete, the specific radius value at which we were seeing the trampoline. So if I substitute different values of n over here, and then we calculate the value of r at which we should see trampolining, this is what we will get. I mean, I can calculate the value of r theoretical, where we should be seeing the trampolining. And when we actually put it with our experimental data at which we do see trampolining, looks like there is a very good agreement with what we propose and what we see in the experiment. So which shows that this entire trampolining is because of the interdependence or the parametric resonance between the vapor layer and the droplets. So which was interesting. And so there's a universality of the behavior which is actually independent of the liquid, of the initial size and the substrate temperature. So that is the first part where we're looking at this the trampolining event. I'll shift gear a little bit towards this regime. So people have done a lot of work in the nucleate boiling. We have been studying the Leidenfrost regime or the film boiling. But what happens in this transitional boiling, actually very limited work is there. If you look at it, we don't know what is the extent of liquid-solid contact in this transition boiling. What is the mechanism of boiling and vapor generation in the transition boiling is also now we have been starting to question ourselves now because we don't understand completely. So the important parameters here is to understand what is the boiling regime. In transition boiling also, how does the boiling occur, which I'll show you. What is the contact time? Let's say I want to cool this surface using some spray cooling. Now what is important is the contact time of the droplet on the surface, because that will influence how much heat I can take away from the surface. Third is the contact area and the overall heat transfer coefficient. So these are the important parameters as well. So what we realized is that in the transitional boiling, the extent of solid-liquid contact is an unknown parameter. We don't know. There are no correlations to the best of my knowledge, which says that, like, can I determine that, okay, for a given delta T or a given wall superheat, this is the contact, right? Because in pool boiling, we know that, okay, this is my contact, these are my nucleation sites and so on. But what happens in the game, the transition boiling? For that, we are doing the simultaneous experiment for visualizing the bottom view and the side view of a droplet as it is impinging on a heated surface. And we are also trying to make use of the sound data to understand, is there any correlation? So these are very fresh work. This is still a work in progress work. Okay. So this is the side view. This is the bottom view of a droplet as it is impacting a heated surface. It's a sapphire surface at a Weber number of 9.5 at certain temperature. So you can see small black dots over here, which characterizes the liquid-solid contact and so on. And sound data shows that every time the droplet contacts the surface and boils, there is a unique sound signature associated with it. What we show is that with different surface temperature, the droplet contact time also changes with the surface temperature. So when you have the surface temperature is low, there is contact boiling, the contact time is higher. And as it transitions to the Leidenfrost state, the contact time reaches almost similar to the Rayleigh time scale. Right? But in between, there is, depending upon the regime in which the droplet is contacting on the surface, the contact time could also be very low. Okay? But so here in this case, the temperature is 290, the bottom, the temperature is 340 degrees Celsius, but you can see the difference in the extent of the liquid solid contact. What is interesting is that the sound signature also tells us that there is a difference in the liquid solid contact. So in a practical application, if there is a way we can relate the sound data to this, the visual data, then in a practical application, hopefully we can hear a sound and we can say that the regime in which the droplet is boiling. Okay. So here we looked at how the contact area, and the contact area is a function of the Weber number, how is it a function of the temperature, and shows that they both have a relation. But what I want to point out is to this, regime identification, right? So here what we are showing is that at different temperature and different Weber number, this is what I was telling about. Even though we know that is the transition boiling regime, but the way the type of boiling could still be different. Here we call droplet dancing, so you can see that this is a bit very different droplet dynamics compared to droplet splashing, fragmentation where the droplet falls and fragments into small bits, and then the Leiden process. You can see that in each of these four regimes that we still see, each of the three regimes that we still see in the transitional boiling regime, the associated sound signature is very different. The question is, can we use that to get an idea about the extent of heat transfer, about the regime in which the droplet boiling is occurring, and so on. Okay. So that is where I will stop this presentation. So the idea is that the wetted area fraction is dependent on the regime in which the droplet boiling occurs, and identification. So what we are currently working on is identification of the impact regime with using a sound signature. So with that, I'll stop my presentation. And I would like to thank my collaborator, Professor Gaurav Tomar, on part of the trampolining work, and the students Zata Prasad and Pranjal Agarwal. She has done majority of the work that I have presented today in this presentation. And I thank you all for your attention.
Any questions? This RC contact radius, what would that relation what would be the minimum value? For example,
Very small perturbation. So let's say you imagine a droplet sitting. You have a contact radius, which is static contact radius that is there. Let's say you are the droplet, like you can think of a droplet breathing mode. Every time it moves a little bit down, you'll have a max. So that is dependent upon what is the value of epsilon that you are choosing. It could be a very small parameter.
is there any relation between them to the droplet pillar height and the sparseness?
So droplet is much larger than the pillar spacing that we have looked at. So droplet is millimetric. The pillars are on the order of 10 micrometers.
So viscosity, does viscosity has any influence on the sparseness and the height?
Viscosity of the vapor is important. That is what is giving us the lubrication pressure force.
Because we are talking about water droplet as well as the design droplet. Where the viscosity is almost 1,000 times higher.
Okay. So
it doesn't make any sense.
So we have to think about the viscosity of the vapor, not the liquid. Liquid viscosity is playing a role in the internal convection that you see. You don't see any internal convection in the case of a glycerin.
In this last work that you're showing, are those all water droplets you've been
These
working?
are all water droplets.
Have you tried doing anything with something with a low contact angle?
We have not. In this droplet impact experiments, we have not.
Okay, because I think you will get very different results. Because right now you can see you are trapping a lot of air inside that, the fragmentation that you're seeing,
Yeah.
you're picking up a lot of air inside. And that is because the water has a pretty high contact angle, so you're trapping a lot of bubbles
Yeah.
underneath that.
Yeah.
And that is the reason you get such a big transition region. Like over here, the transition that you get,
Yeah.
it's like 100 degrees before you get, you get a very wide transition region of,
This one, yeah.
yeah. I think if you go to something like ethanol, you'll get a very sudden change. If you ever look at the Leiden-Frost curves, water has a very wide transition region,
Yes.
but all the hydrocarbons are very narrow. And I think that is related to the contact area and the angle. But it's something I've been thinking about for decades, and this experiment would be very nice if you could actually verify that why you have such a narrow transition region for hydrocarbons as compared to water.
So what we saw was that, correct. So I understand your question. So basically you have this nucleate boiling and all of a sudden it changes to the Leidenfrost effect.
Yeah.
In our experiments, we do see that when we do experiments on a flat surface with water or with dense pillars, actually the transition is very sharp. But when we do experiments on like sparse pillars, there the transition is actually very it's difficult to find out where the Leidenfrost state happened.
But that would be, but even just for the flat surface, if you look at water, the difference between the minimum temperature and the maximum temperature tends to be quite wide. Whereas if you do it with something like ethanol or heptane or something like that, it's only a few degrees. You get a very sharp
It's
transition.
interesting to see what are the regimes that happen in that case.
So I think you will get much fewer regimes because you don't see that sort of, the droplet splashing and all that. You won't see that with the hydrocarbon.
I see. I think Professor Tope has done a lot of work on this type of
Thermal repellency, super repellency, we call it.
repellency.
Yeah.
Thermal atomization.
Yeah.
But I also have a suggestion. Could you go to the slide where you showed the decreasing amplitude of trampolining and then it was still and then it went up again?
Yeah.
Could we just see that slide?
Yeah.
It seems to me, having now this dimensionless equation that you've shown us was a little bit fast to completely digest, but nevertheless, I believe it. And if we go to this slide, it seems that from the decrease, the rate of decrease, the change of droplet radius, which you're actually showing on the right scale. So for every trampolining cycle, the heat transfer, the heat taken away from the surface. And of course, we have actual equations for that, for the film boiling where there's no fluid on top. And so you could compare theory to experiment in this case because
You're saying
the
that
transfer rate.
if the drop radius is reducing,
It's reducing with time and your frequency changes, so you know the heat transfer for every bounce.
Yeah.
And you can compare that with theory for every bounce, and then that would be actually a nice extension of what you have.
Yeah. So here the droplet size actually, if we take these are many jumps that we have put here, so we don't see. But then if we compare this sample, if I take a few jumps, the droplet radius doesn't change much. But actually this is what I showed here, that over there versus here, the Rayleigh frequency does change. But this is already, we are already taking that into account. When we talk about this FV by F Rayleigh, we are already taking into account the dependence upon the radius.
Okay, I might ISC at the end of the week, maybe we should we can have a talk.
On the thing of the droplet splash and this droplet formation, right now we are questioning how does the liquid to vapor phase change happen in the case of impact. So is it because in the case when we have a pool of liquid and you're heating the surface, we have a bubble which grows, we know that. What happens in this case? Because the droplet is approaching this heated surface at a very large and approaching very fast, and then you have, it's approaching towards Leidenfrost effect. So is it like a bubble, or is it like vapor which is now shearing the liquid vapor interface into droplets? Because the experiments actually it's not very clear. So I think it's
Well, what is very clear is above the Leidenfrost, it bounces and there are no secondary droplets. But what we noticed is in the transitional zone, you get secondary droplets when it hits. So you have contact, which you showed, you saw the contact.
Yeah.
And it's that contact that gives you those secondary droplets. And as soon as all of those secondary droplets, so you have mass loss, which you don't have in the Leidenfrost or in the nucleate boiling, it's very, very much slower. So you have immediate mass loss. And this is what you showed in your film, of course.
But what is the mechanism of boiling? Like bubble size, we cannot define, I guess, in this case. We will discuss. I think there's a lot of open questions here.
you do get bubbles inside, but
Yeah,
you know the bubbles are
yeah,
because
they're
of the
bursting.
trapping of air
Yeah,
from there.
correct.
And that's why if you have a low contact angle, you eliminate that.
I think it'll be interesting to see what happens
Yeah.
there.
And those bubbles those bursting bubbles at the very beginning of contact, that's what those secondary droplets are, they're bursting. And then it lifts off and you have no more secondary droplets, so that's the difference.
I have a question regarding the internal circulation.
Yeah.
So is that due to Marangoni effect or it's natural natural
Yes.
convection?
Yes,
Because I can see with the pillars that you have, I think the available temperature difference is lower. So
Yeah.
the convection currents are coming down.
so we actually did some work on that. We show that it's not because of Marangoni convection or Rayleigh-Bénard convection that is usually we suggest for a droplet sitting on a heated surface.
Right.
In this case, the fact that the convection is dependent upon the underlying pillars shows that it's because the shear which is exerted because of this
because
vapor
of the
layer which is going out.
Movement.
Yeah, of the vapor, and then
Okay.
that is shearing the liquid interface, and that sets up a circulation.
But the temperature difference itself is not sufficient to drive any internal circulation.
Because we also have a large internal flow. So if you look at this, it's more than like what you would see. So it's centimeters per second. So, but we have not done in temperature measurements. Still.
Yeah. So one last question before we go for lunch.
Yeah,
Yeah, so I have two short questions. One is the reduced order equation which you derived for the droplet trampolining effect. So can that explain this behavior of decaying oscillations, hovering and then again?
yes,
It
it
does
does.
that.
It does. So this trampolining happens only at integer and half integer value. Rest everywhere we can. So here we have not taken into account the viscous dissipation, but if you take into dissipation, so basically this equation you can explain trampolining only when n is given by this. For rest everything, now moment you add on the viscous dissipation, it will start the bouncing height will reduce.
Correct. And another remark that I had, the last problem which you spoke about, the regime identification. So the entire problem really sets itself up for an application of supervised machine learning. So that
Yeah.
suggestion.
Yeah, I think I did not say that because we still have it is just a very work in progress.
Right.
Sukrita, one last question. In that slide number 14, where you were talking about this damping and then the bouncing back of the droplet, like, is it just for my understanding, is it like a cyclic process? Like, again, will it suffer damping?
Yes. So that's what I was showing in this picture over here. Because hovering happens at a given size. And basically, hovering, when I say it's like complete arrest of any motion, it's just there. But then otherwise, you do see this increase and reduction in the overall height and so on. So that happens, but it's not a periodic thing. Again, that is given by the n value that they show in the modeling part.
Yes, you need to start traveling.
So just to add on to that, I think the Polycarpus group,
Yeah.
so Karthik is joining us as a faculty. So maybe now we have somebody to collaborate on the trampoline.
Yeah.
Karthik.
I think he was there in that.
Yeah.
Steep
Okay, so let us thank Professor.
Thank you, Dr. Susmita Dash, for the quality. I request Professor Marco Marengo to
Thank you.